Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. A few days ago, we made a video regarding a new course that we are releasing, an intensive in the winter break regarding Usul Al-fiqh, Hanafi legal theory. Alhamdulillah, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant His fruition. In that video, I passively mentioned something regarding a great work, a primer that is celebrated across the globe, and for centuries it's been taught in Hanafi institutions, which is Uṣūl Al Shāshī. And there was some requests that came for elaboration regarding this, so I decided might as well make a small review regarding the work Uṣūl Al Shāshī, and inshallah in the future we'll have a more lengthy review. In this review, I really want to focus on three things. Now, overall, the book is a beautiful work, and definitely it's been accepted, and there's so many commentaries and so on and so forth that a student can find regarding it. So we're not saying to replace the work. Definitely a person should be studying this work just to gain a degree of comfort in the traditional works that have been celebrated across the centuries in the Hanafi school of thought. However, in order for a student to really maximize his studies of this work, there are a few points that he has to keep in mind. So we'll mention that inshallah bi'idhnillahi ta'ala briefly. Number one, keep in mind that sometimes in this work, the entire discussion is not mentioned. And the whole purpose or the reason behind that is the author, he was focusing on being as concise as possible. And so in that, he wanted to focus on what he felt was important. And there were some discussions that he felt maybe we don't need to talk about, maybe we don't need to address, maybe they're already understood by the student, and therefore there's no need to address them. However, this is a problem for someone who has never been exposed to a primer or has studied an actual lengthy work that covers every single aspect, every single discussion in full detail in Usul Al-fiqh before. And the example I gave was Am and Khas. In Am, the author, he starts off by mentioning the definition of both of them. And he does not mention the siyagh of umum, meaning how is a person able to recognize Am? How is a person able to recognize Khas? He doesn't mention this in Usul Shashi. And then I mentioned after that interestingly, the author mentions al-'am alladhi khussa anhu al-ba'd wal-'am alladhi lam yukhass anhu shay. The 'am from which some has been specified, and that 'am from which nothing has been specified. And he mentions the hukum regarding them. One of them is qat'i, the other one will be considered dhanni in the remaining afrad. Over here, it's important to keep in mind that while the author did mention the ruling regarding the 'am, the general word after specification has occurred, or before specification has occurred, he did not clarify for us what specification actually means. What is takhsis to begin with? What are the conditions of takhsis? So we find in the other works that takhsis, according to the Hanafi school of thought, has two conditions. The dalil, which is the mukhassis, the proof that will be the mukhassis, that will be doing the specification. That proof has to be, number one, mustaqil, and number two, it has to be muqarin. What that basically means is that it has to come right after the word or the dalil, which is the 'am, which has the 'am in it. And number two, it has to be a separate sentence. It can't be part of the first sentence through, for example, an exception, or for example, a sifa, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to truly conceptualize the actual discussion, you would have to know these are the conditions of takhsis according to the Hanafiya. Otherwise, a person will not be able to truly digest the reality of takhsis and how it actually takes place. And in fact, this is where the core difference occurs between the Hanafi school of thought and the Jumhur, the rest of the schools of thought. And this was actually skipped. It wasn't mentioned explicitly. And so therefore, the first point is that sometimes the discussions are not completely exhausted. The entire comprehensiveness that is necessary within those discussions is not completely held. And because of that, a student has to be aware and he has to make sure that he focuses and looks through the shuruh. The second point, this is actually a really important point. Many times the examples that are given in Uṣūl Al Shāshī are examples that are contested. When you go through the shuruh as well as the mutawwalat, the later works that have been compiled, you will find that not every single example which is assumed to be an example of a specific principle is actually a correct and valid example. Now, if you are studying the work not from a critical analysis, rather from the perspective that you want to take that work and through it develop a foundation in legal theory, but the principle that's being presented is not actually in line with the example that's being given, in that situation, we will say that it's very unlikely that you'll truly grasp the reality of the principle with such an example. In Mutlaq and Muqayyid, in Uṣūl Al Shāshī, the author, he mentions a lot of examples of az-ziyada al-nas, as opposed to mutlaq and muqayyid. And also, going back to the first discussion, he doesn't mention the different scenarios of when mutlaq and muqayyid will take place. And yes, these two concepts, mutlaq and muqayyid and ziyada al-nas, they do overlap. There's no doubt in that, in terms of the logical theory behind them, and the logical theory behind the Hanafi approach to both of these concepts. But at the end of the day, they still are two different concepts. And likewise, many of the examples that were mentioned as well in khas, they can be contested, and so on and so forth. The third point that I want to mention regarding the work, which is that the order that the author selected and chose in the work is not necessarily the best order. And order is not something which is guaranteed that it has to be in a very specific manner. There can be a degree of ijtihad. How do you want to order the different discussions that are mentioned? But overall, we say it's better to keep discussions that are related and connected together. For example, huruf al-ma'ani, the discussion regarding the different types of huruf and whether what their literal meanings are and what their majazi ma'ani are. This is technically a discussion that should be coming right after haqiqa and majaz, because it has a direct correlation with that discussion. The entire discussion regarding amr and nahi, these are actually types of khas. Amr and nahi are from the aqsam of khas. So technically that discussion should be coming within the discussion of khas, as is done by Sahib al-Manar in his work, and other Hanafi scholars as well. So the third point is when it comes to the order, many times Uṣūl Al Shāshī, for example, he presents an order where maybe if the order was tweaked slightly, it would be better. Now these are just some points. There's a lot more that can be discussed regarding this work. Overall, it's a great work, but to keep in mind that when you study the work, you want to study with an instructor and a teacher that is going to be using the more extensive shuruh and the mutawwalat in order to teach this work. Sheikh Zakaria al-Kandahlawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the first works he started teaching when he started teaching in his institution was Uṣūl Al Shāshī. And he mentioned over there that I was actually teaching half of it, the second half, and there was another teacher that taught the first half. In his autobiography, he mentions this. And he said that because it was my first time teaching, I was really passionate. So I was doing mutala, I was actually reviewing using talwih al-tawdih to teach Uṣūl Al Shāshī. So the picture that I was bringing to the students was such a picture, a grand picture, where the students were so taken aback by my lesson that they asked me that, can you reteach us everything that we already technically studied, but want to study in this manner? What is it that was mentioned in talwih, or what is it that is mentioned in the mutawwalat that will change the perception of our outlook regarding this book, which is Uṣūl Al Shāshī? That is the secret to actually gaining the most potential from it and studying it and getting to the core of the reality of this work. And inshallah ta'ala, as I mentioned in the course that we are releasing, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, in the winter, we're going to be doing exactly that. Yes, this is technically the first level, not the second level, but Mabādiʻ al-Uṣūl, which is simply a concise, a further abridged version of Uṣūl Al Shāshī. We are revisiting this work and changing up the order and changing up some of the discussions and making sure the examples are very precise and elaborating on the examples and so on and so forth. Many more things, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, that you will come across. So join us bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.